Hello and welcome back to the Workbench. This is where we discuss ceiling fan history, trivia, and technical information. And we're going to start out talking today about China cold storage. China cold storage has been a great mystery among fan collectors for as long as we've heard that name. There was a rumor and a theory they were the OEM behind. Hello and welcome back to the Workbench. This is where we discuss ceiling fan history, trivia, and technical information. Today we're going to start out talking about China cold storage. And China cold storage has been a mystery among fan collectors and fan aficionados for several decades now because it's a name we've seen stamped on several imported fans. But it didn't seem like a fan factory name. Like, it's a storage? What? So, we're going to learn some things about them today, and we're going to see where that takes us. In 1952, China Cold Storage and Engineering was founded by James Wu, the son of the largest taxi company in Hong Kong. They were making air conditioners. So the name makes a little more sense because back in 1952, what were air conditioners used for? In part, they were used for storing things that had to stay cold. That's 1952. In 1958, they introduced the name Weatherite for some of their products. It is just a name that they use. It is not a separate company or anything like that. In 1961, China Cold Storage and Engineering starts manufacturing air conditioners for Westinghouse. So if you have a Westinghouse air conditioner made from 61 to mid to late 80s, it was possibly made by China Cold Storage and Engineering. It might also have been labeled Weatherite. In 1975, in the United States, Westinghouse labeled ceiling fans show up that are made by China Cold Storage. They show up as a 36-inch fan and a 48-inch fan. Also, 1975 or 1976 is when we presume that the Sonidair fans made by China Cold Storage show up. And there was only 2 containers of them imported. And I have a lot of questions about that. That's an unanswered topic. I still don't know anything about them. And especially because they seem to be unipacked with wood blades, but wood blades weren't being made in Hong Kong at that point. So there's a lot of questions there, but there's a reason why we think it had to be those years, and we'll get there in a second. In 1976, a company called Leading Edge was founded in the U.S. as an importer of eventually industrial and commercial ceiling fans. In 1977, Westinghouse... start over. Hello and welcome back to the Workbench. This is where we discuss ceiling fan history, trivia, and technical information. So today we're going to learn some more about... Hello and welcome back to the Workbench. This is where we discuss ceiling fan history, trivia, and technical information. Today we're going to learn about China Cold Storage, and we're going to see where that takes us. China Cold Storage has been a bit of a mystery to fan collectors and aficionados for the past several decades because it seems like a rather odd name for a fan company. And we know so very little about them. So we're going to find out why for both of those things, both why they were named that and why we know so little about them. So, in 1952, China Cold Storage and Engineering was founded by James Wu, who was the son of the owner of the largest taxi company in Hong Kong. And they were making air conditioners. And now the name makes a little more sense because if you think about it, what were air conditioners used for in 1952? In part, storing stuff that had to stay cold. In 1958, they introduced the Weatherite name, which they would later use for air conditioners and other things. In 1961, China Cold Storage and Engineering starts manufacturing air conditioners for Westinghouse. So if you have a Westinghouse-made air conditioner after 1961, there is a possibility it was made by China Cold Storage and Engineering. Could have also been labeled Weatherite. In 1975, Westinghouse labeled ceiling fans show up in the U.S. as 36-inch and 48-inch fans, and they're clearly made by China Cold Storage. Also, 1975 to 1976, an unknown importer imports 2 containers of fans from China Cold Storage into the U.S., just 2 containers. And we don't know much about those fans other than that they were sold residentially. I have a theory that those could have been Sonidair. We'll get to that a little bit later. That's 1975 to 1976. Also in 1976, a company called Leading Edge was founded, and we'll talk about them more a little later. 1977, the 56-inch Westinghouse, China Cold Storage industrial type fan shows up in ads. 1978 was the last year for Westinghouse labeled fans. 1979, the Emerson Fan shows up at Sears, which is has a China cold storage motor and then Emerson parts on the rest of it. And then in 1980, Emerson starts selling that fan under their old label. In 1981, Leading Edge begins their contract with Grainger, which is how most of us know about Leading Edge fans, Dayton fans, things like that, again, which were made by China Cold Storage, but we'll get to that a little bit later. 1982, Leading Edge was the first company to offer 277-volt fans. 1982 to 1983, the Sears fans that are like the Emerson version, but they're not the Emerson version. They got the bell canopy and a few other parts are different. Those show up at Sears. In 1983, Leading Edge patents the cast waterproof fan, and the pictures show a China cold storage motor, so we're getting a little closer there to answering some questions. 1983, Leading Edge products officially show up in Grainger catalogs. 1985, Leading Edge trademarks the High-Tech and Awesome 60. 1986, Leading Edge, High-Tech, and Awesome 60 show up in ads. In 1987, Hutchison-BOAG Engineering, a wholly owned subsidiary of Hutchison Whampoa, acquires China Cold Storage and Engineering and its subsidiary Weatherite Industries for an undisclosed amount. That's 1987. 1989, Inchcape Pacific buys Hutchison-BOAG and the ceiling fan factories are closed. 1990 is the last sighting of China Cold Storage through Grainger, and Leading Edge shifts their production to Thailand. 1996, Leading Edge patents their rolled edge metal blades for low ceilings. They also patent a reversible blade for commercial fans. In 1998, Leading Edge is sold to Marley MEP. In 1999, Leading Edge is officially dissolved and Big Ass Fans is founded. Ironically, the founder of Big Ass Fans asks Leading Edge for their Grainger contracts, and Leading Edge declines. And in 2018, China Cold Storage is officially dissolved as a company. Okay, so that's a lot of data in there. We still don't know very much. Let's get into some more details about Leading Edge, because they were, most of us, when we've seen China Cold Storage fans, they were labeled either Leading Edge or Dayton, which were bought from Leading Edge. So let's learn something about that. Let's see what we can learn about Leading Edge. So here's the Leading Edge story. In the mid-70s, a Florida lumberyard contacted a businessman named Gerald Bogage and asked him to compete with David Moss importing residential fans. In other words, David Moss was doing Lindsay Lumber in one other lumberyard, and a different lumberyard saw what they were doing and was like, oh, this is the business to get in, but I don't want to deal with that Moss guy. I know this guy, Jerry Bogage. Let me ask him what he can do. And so Mr. Bogage decides to try importing residential fans a la David Moss. And he does it for 6 months as the Leading Edge Fan Company, which was a residential company then. And after 6 months, he took his company to the Chicago hardware trade shows and saw how many residential importers there were and how few commercial and industrial. So he was like, wait a second. The market's flooded with residential fans, but nobody's focusing on commercial industrial. He saw a niche. And so Leading Edge went from being a residential company to a commercial industrial company after 6 months. Interestingly enough, their residential fans were named High-Tech and Mirage. So those names will come up again later, as you guys know. So, how did Leading Edge connect with China Cold Storage? So the Westinghouse fans that were imported into the U.S. in the mid-70s were a test program by China Cold Storage to see if they had a market. They never went anywhere with the test program, but Leading Edge sampled those and went to China Cold Storage based on that. Mr. Bogage, basically, he sampled the Westinghouse fan, the China Cold Storage fan, liked it, went to every other factory that was big at the time, felt that their products did not measure up, and also China Cold Storage was willing to work with his designs and give him exclusive contracts, which was important to him. So when Leading Edge was founded, they considered Emerson their original competitor. The only companies making industrial fans at the time and marketing them for commercial industrial purposes were Emerson, EnviroFan, and Airmaster. Everybody else was just, even if they were selling 3 metal bladed fans, they were selling them residentially. Leading Edge was the first company to market commercial industrial fans in sizes other than 56-inch or 52-inch. The Awesome 60 came first. It was the largest and most powerful fan made at the time. The Magnum was the second one. The 72-inch Magnum was marketed to Fortune 500 companies that only bought top-tier products. Philip Morris was their biggest customer of Magnum fans. Their Philip Morris factories had nothing but 72-inch Magnum fans at one time. Leading Edge had exclusive contracts with China Cold Storage for every market except Australia. China Cold Storage already had an existing customer for the Westinghouse fans in 56 only in Australia. Leading Edge had exclusive contracts for every fan China Cold Storage made except 56-inch. So that's why we know so little about them and why so few other companies use them, is they were exclusive to Leading Edge, and Leading Edge very much protected their details. Leading Edge also had exclusive contracts with Home Depot and Toys R Us. That's why every Home Depot store and every Toys R Us store, while Leading Edge was in business, had their fans installed. So, we talked about Grainger, and we talked about the China Cold Storage fans being sold through Grainger as Dayton. Why weren't they sold as Leading Edge? Grainger sold Emerson as Emerson. They sold Fasco as Fasco, and so on and so forth. So it turns out that Gerald Bogage and Paul Thursby, the Grainger buyer, flipped a coin to see whose name would be on the fans, whether it be Leading Edge or Dayton. Grainger won the coin toss, but it ended up being a much better deal for Leading Edge that people did not know that Leading Edge and Dayton were the same fans, because otherwise Leading Edge would not have been able to do business with any of Grainger's competitors. Airmaster had the only waterproof fan at the time that Leading Edge patented theirs, and it was the thing that we think about as the Relight Airmaster that was, British. They marketed that as waterproof, but it really wasn't. Gerald Bogage was known to be the Burton or the P.T. Barnum of the commercial fan business. He was known for doing tricks at trade shows. When he went to trade shows, he would hang his fans 55 feet over his booth. When you got within 30 feet of the Leading Edge booth, the temperature changed dramatically. He would install fans and then have pieces of toilet paper taped around so people could see where the airflow was. And then he would do the same thing with one of his competitors' fans, and you could see, oh, the toilet paper's moving X amount of feet out with my fan, but now with their fan. He also had a 60-inch fan chrome-plated and hung it on a 40-foot down rod over his booth at any trade show that he went to. Here's a little more trivia that's related. Marley bought the old Emerson factory in South Carolina in the early 80s. Emerson sold their heating division, Chromalox, to Marley, and the heat fan almost botched the deal because Marley did not want the fan division included. Emerson later discontinued the Stratojet because the company that made the blades went bankrupt. When Marley bought Leading Edge in the late 90s, the people at Marley who organized the deal were all the people from Emerson from the buyout. So when Mr. Bogage, was approached by Marley to buy out his company in the 90s, when I guess he was ready to retire, it was all people that he knew from Emerson as his competitors, and they welcomed them with open arms. So that is quite a lot of information that we did not know about China Cold Storage and Leading Edge, and I think we now know that the reason why we know so little about China Cold Storage is because, with rare exception, they were exclusive to Leading Edge. One question that I had was, what about the little Emerson fan? And apparently that did not count because they were just getting the motor. They weren't getting the whole fan, and Emerson was using the rest of their parts. Presumably Sears would have been doing the same thing with those wood-bladed fans, although I suppose that could have been an exception too. That brings up the question about Sonidair. I still have not found anything about Sonidair other than they were a 70s importer. I believe they had ties to Washington State and Chicago, and they imported a very small quantity of fans, which is why when I learned that predating Leading Edge, there were 2 containers of China Cold Storage fans imported into the U.S. for residential purposes in 75 and 76. I said, oh, that sounds like Sonidair. But the reason why that seems like a curiosity is because those Sonidair fans are pre-packed with wood blades, and Hong Kong companies weren't doing wood blades until 1980. So that's a question that we don't have an answer to yet. Again, if I learn more, we'll do an update video. But I hope this has answered a lot of questions about China cold storage. I hope this has also taught us some new things about leading edge that most of us did not know. Hope you've enjoyed this video. As always, this video has a sponsor, and that sponsor is Fanstick. Bye, Fanstick. Hello, and welcome back to the Workbench. This is where we discuss ceiling fan history, trivia, and technical information. Today we're going to talk about China cold storage, which has been a mystery among fan collectors and aficionados for several years. And we're going to talk a little bit about their biggest customer, Leading Edge. So let's learn some things. In 1952, China Cold Storage and Engineering was founded by James Wu, the son of the owner of the largest taxi company in Hong Kong. They were making air conditioners. And now the name makes more sense because as fan collectors, we'd always said, China Cold Storage? That can't be a fan company or a fan factory. That's got to be just a place where the fans were stored, right? But no, because they were making air conditioners. If you think about it, in 1952, what were air conditioners used for? Among other things, for things that had to be stored at cool temperatures. In 1958, they introduced the Weatherite name, which will turn up on fans and other things. In 1961, China Cold Storage and Engineering starts manufacturing air conditioners for Westinghouse. So if you have a Westinghouse air conditioner made after 1961, it might have been made by China Cold Storage, might also have been labeled Weatherite. In 1975, Westinghouse labeled ceiling fans show up in the US, 36-inch and 48-inch, and they are made by China Cold Storage. Also in 1975 and 1976, there is a mystery company that imported 2 containers of fans from China Cold Storage to the US for residential use, and we will circle back to that for sure. In 1976, Leading Edge was founded. We'll talk a lot more about them a little later on in the video. In 1977, the 56-inch Westinghouse labeled fan shows up in ads. 1978 is the last year for Westinghouse labeled fans sold in the US. In 1979, the Emerson fan shows up at Sears. And if you recall from my Sears and Emerson videos, as well as videos of that fan, it has a China Cold Storage motor and Emerson parts for the rest of the fan. In 1980, that fan shows up labeled Emerson. Remember, in 79, it was labeled Sears, sold through Sears. 1980, and that was probably because Sears was looking for a lower cost option. Emerson decided to try an imported motor. And in 1980, Emerson decides to sell that to their own distributors. 1981, Leading Edge begins their contracts with Graingers, which is very significant because I think everybody knows fans that Leading Edge was the biggest supplier to Grainger for industrial and commercial fans. Most of us, if we know Leading Edge fans, we know them through the Dayton label of Grainger. So that is a big year. In 1982, Leading Edge was the first company to offer 277-volt commercial and industrial ceiling fans made by China Cold Storage. You got to think about, again, most fan imports and domestic fans started out as residential and then started getting repurposed for commercial. But then you got these commercial and industrial guys saying, all my lights are 277 volts. I need some fans that run on that circuit. Emerson tried to do it with K63 motors, did not go well. But Leading Edge was able to successfully design a 277 volt fan motor that worked well with their China Cold Storage designs. In 1982 and 1983, the Sears non-Emerson fan shows up with the China Cold Storage motor and presumably canopy and other parts at this point. That's also an anomaly, and we may circle back to that later. In 1983, Leading Edge patents a cast waterproof fan, which of course we know was made by China Cold Storage, but that was designed and patented by Gerald Bogage of Leading Edge. We're going to talk about him a lot more in this video. 1983 is when I first have record of Leading Edge products showing up in Grainger catalogs. Obviously, they started their contracts with them a couple years earlier. They may have been in earlier catalogs, and I just don't have documentation of that. We know for sure they're in Grainger catalogs in 83. In 1985, Leading Edge trademarks High Tech and Awesome 60. We'll circle back to those a little later, too. In 1986, the Leading Edge High Tech and Awesome 60 commercial industrial fans show up in ads as Leading Edge, not as Dayton or Grainger products. In 1987, HUTCHISON-BOAG Engineering, a wholly owned subsidiary of Hutchison-Whampoa, acquires China Cold Storage and Engineering and its subsidiary Weatherite Industries for an undisclosed amount. That's 1987. In 1989, Inchcape Pacific buys HUTCHISON-BOAG, and the ceiling fan factories are closed. That's 89. 1990 is the last sighting of China Cold Storage Grainger products, and Leading Edge shifts production to Thailand. 1996, Leading Edge patented their rolled edge metal blades for low ceilings. So this is there was an OSHA thing, or possibly a UL thing, that metal bladed fans have to be 10 feet or higher, because if you stick your hand in it, you could hurt your hand. And Leading Edge was able to get around that by patenting a metal blade with a rolled edge. So they were the first commercial fan that could be legally marketed for low ceilings. That was 1996. They also patented a reversible blade for commercial fans, because you got to think about it, most commercial fan blades are sculpted in some way. Either they're curved up at the ends, or the blades are curved like this. You run the fan in reverse, it doesn't do much. But they patented a reversible fan blade that works in both directions. So if you want to have a commercial fan that's reversible, you could get that exclusively from Leading Edge. That's 1996. In 1998, Leading Edge is sold to Marley MEP. In 1999, Leading Edge is officially dissolved, and Big Ass Fans is founded. And the founder of Big Ass Fans asks the founder of Leading Edge for their Grainger connection. Leading Edge declines. Also, Leading Edge believes that Big Ass Fans started as a way of copying their Magnum 72-inch fan. That may or may not be true, but I think it's some interesting trivia. In 2018, China Cold Storage is officially dissolved by their parent company. Okay, I said we're going to circle back to a lot of things, and first of all, let's learn a lot more about Leading Edge, because since Leading Edge was more or less the exclusive importer of China Cold Storage fans, that is where a lot of the information about them lies. Plus, it's very interesting, and they're a very interesting company. So let's learn some things. In the mid-70s, a Florida lumberyard contacted Gerald Bogage, one of his business connections, and asked him to compete with David Moss importing residential fans. So what happened was David Moss was importing fans for Lindsay Lumber. I think that was his first lumberyard contract, and there was a second lumberyard. And one of their competitors, also a Florida lumberyard, was like, okay, I see where this is going. This is where the business is headed, but I don't like this David Moss guy. I know this Jerry Bogage guy. He's a good guy. Let's get him to import some fans for us. So Leading Edge is founded as a residential fan company for exactly 6 months. And Jerry Bogage took his residential fans to the Chicago hardware trade shows. And he saw how many other residential importers were there. And he said, this market is flooded. This is not going to work. But then he realized there were only a handful of commercial and industrial fan suppliers. And he saw a niche in the business. So after 6 months, they shift from residential fans to commercial industrial fans. Interestingly enough, the names of two of their residential fans were High Tech and Mirage. So that all predates China Cold Storage, or at least their involvement with China Cold Storage. So how did they get involved with China Cold Storage? Well, we talked about the Westinghouse labeled fans in the mid-70s earlier in the video. Turns out that was a test program that Westinghouse did to just see how much of a market they had for importing fans from China Cold Storage. And they never really went anything. They did not have any success with their test program. But Leading Edge sampled one of those products and said, this is the supplier for us. And Gerald Bogage took some of his designs, some of his specifications, and he went to multiple different factories in Hong Kong and said, I want fans made to this specification. And the only company that could do it was China Cold Storage. And so he asked China Cold Storage for an exclusive contract. And as we'll talk about, most of their business was exclusive, and that's why we see so little of China Cold Storage from anybody other than Leading Edge or Dayton. So when Leading Edge was founded as a commercial fan importer, industrial fan importer, they considered Emerson their only competitor. The only other companies that were marketing industrial fans at the time for industrial and commercial use were Emerson, EnviroFan, and Airmaster. And they didn't really think that any of them took it seriously enough. None of them had the same, quality standards and design ideas that Leading Edge did. They felt that they were a much superior fan to any of those companies. Leading Edge was the first company to market commercial and industrial fans in sizes other than 56-inch or 52-inch. The Awesome 60 came first, and it was the largest, most powerful fan available at the time. The Magnum was the second version. The 72-inch Magnum was marketed to Fortune 500 companies that only bought top-tier products. And the example that I have is Philip Morris. Philip Morris factories at the time, early mid-80s, used exclusively 72-inch Magnum fans. They had a huge order from Leading Edge. Leading Edge also had exclusive contracts with Home Depot and Toys R Us. That's why any Home Depot or Toys R Us built while Leading Edge was in business has their fans. They had exclusive contracts. So, obviously the biggest buyer of Leading Edge fans was Grainger, and the reason most of us are familiar with their products are through the Dayton label. So you might ask, why were Leading Edge fans sold as Dayton when Grainger sold Emerson as Emerson, Fasco as Fasco, etc., etc.? Well, Gerald Bogage and Paul Thursby, the Grainger buyer, flipped a coin to see whose name would be on the fans, either Leading Edge or Dayton. Grainger won, and that's why the fans are labeled Dayton. But it ended up being much better for Leading Edge because this way people did not know that Leading Edge and Dayton were the same fans. Otherwise, Leading Edge would not have been able to sell to Grainger's competitors. You know, so Graybar Electric and the other companies, they wouldn't have bought from the same company as Grainger, but since they didn't know, you could get Leading Edge fans, and other companies ended up being much better for the company. So at the time that Leading Edge patented their waterproof fan, the only other waterproof fan available was the Airmaster. We as fan collectors and fan aficionados know that as the Relight Airmaster or British Airmaster. They weren't really waterproof. They were marketed as waterproof, but they were pretty poorly designed. Let's talk a little bit more about Mr. Jerry Bogage. He was known as the Burton or the P.T. Barnum of the commercial fan business. He was known for doing tricks at trade shows. When he went to trade shows, we talked about the Chicago Hardware Trade Show earlier, he would get there early and hang his fans 55 feet over the Leading Edge booth. When you got within 30 feet of the booth, you could feel the temperature change. He would install fans and then have pieces of toilet paper taped all around the booth so you could see how far the airflow went from his fans, and then he would do the same thing with a competitor's fan, and you could see the difference. He had a 60-inch chrome-plated fan hung on a 40-foot down rod over his booth every time he went to go set up at a trade show. Can you imagine a 60-inch cast aluminum fan, chrome-plated on a 40-foot down rod? I really hope there's pictures somewhere because I want to see it. So, we talked about how Leading Edge was eventually bought out. Marley originally bought the old Emerson factory in South Carolina. And that's how, when we talk about Marley's factories in South Carolina and stuff like that, those were originally the Emerson factories. Marley bought them out in the early 80s. Emerson sold their heating division, which was called Chromolux, to Marley. That's why the heat fans stopped being called the Chromolux heat fans after a certain period of time, because they sold out that division to Marley. And they actually wanted Marley to buy the heat fan division as well, and that almost botched the deal because Marley did not want the fan division. And so obviously Emerson kept making heat fans, and eventually the Stratojet was discontinued because the company that made the blades went bankrupt. When Marley bought Leading Edge, the people at Marley who organized the deal were Emerson people that had been moved over from the buyout. So basically, Marley bought out Emerson, and then Emerson's heating division became Marley. And in the 90s, when Leading Edge was ready to move on, or Jerry Bogage was ready to retire, or whatever prompted that deal, the people at Marley were originally Emerson people. Like, we know this really good company that you should buy, and they organized the deal. And so when Leading Edge got contacted, it was people they all knew through Emerson. Okay, I said I was going to circle back to that 2 containers of imports in '76, and that's because we talked about how. Wow, did I screw the whole thing up this far in? Hello and welcome back to the Workbench. This is where we discuss ceiling fan history, trivia, and technical information. Today we're going to talk about China cold storage, and we're also going to talk about Leading Edge, because the two are connected for much of their business history. China cold storage has always been a bit of a mystery to fan collectors and aficionados. We knew very little about them. We're about to find out why. So, China Cold Storage was founded in 1952 as China Cold Storage and Engineering by James Wu, who was the son of the owner of the largest taxi company in Hong Kong. They were founded to make air conditioners. which makes the name make a little more sense, because China Cold Storage always seemed an odd name for a manufacturing company. But if you consider what air conditioners were used in the early 50s, among other things, they were used for things that had to be stored at cooler temperatures. So, China Cold Storage and Engineering, 1952. In 1958, they introduced the Weatherite name, which would later be used on many things, including air conditioners and fans. In 1961, China Cold Storage and Engineering starts manufacturing air conditioners for Westinghouse, for sale in the U.S. and other countries. So if you have a Westinghouse air conditioner made after 1961, it may have been made by China Cold Storage. It also may have been labeled Weatherite. In 1975, Westinghouse ceiling fans show up in the U.S. in the 36-inch and 48-inch size. They are clearly made by China Cold Storage, but they are imported under the Westinghouse brand as part of that deal. In 1975 and 1976, there are two containers of... I've stumbled over my words too many times. Hello and welcome back to the Workbench. This is where we discuss ceiling fan history, trivia, and technical information. Today we're going to talk about China Cold Storage, and we're also going to talk about Leading Edge, because the two companies are pretty thoroughly entwined for much of their history. So, hello and welcome back to the Workbench. This is where we discuss ceiling fan history, trivia, and technical information. Today we're going to talk about China Cold Storage, and we're also going to talk about Leading Edge, because the two companies are pretty thoroughly entwined for much of their business history. So, in 1952, China Cold Storage and Engineering was founded by James Wu, the son of the largest